first in comics, the conventional wisdom passed down to me from certain editors was, you got to do a monthly book. You got to grind out a monthly book, and because of course I'm looking at guys, the studio guys. I'm looking at Bernie Wrightson and Kaluta and Jeff Jones, and it's like, yeah. But you got to bang out a monthly book so you have a reputation, and then you can go on to do the fancy shit.
Right.
Well, I can understand why a publisher would say that, because they want you on a monthly book.
Sure.
But if you don't do your best work fast, you will get a reputation for being an artist who isn't very good.
Right. Right, Mike, thank you so much for joining us.
My pleasure.
I'd like to start off by asking, do you have a routine?
I do.
Yeah.
It's pretty simple. I wake up, I have coffee, I watch a little bit of news, as much as I can stand, then I go to the studio, and I'm there until dinner.
Awesome. That's great. What do you do when you don't know what to do?
Pace. I'm a big pacer. That was the trouble lately. I've done this, I'm kind of semi-retired, so I didn't have a regular schedule as far as getting work done, and I would just end up running around the house in circles till eventually I said, I got to go back to drawing comics. I need to be able to get back in the studio and pick up where I left off the day before. Otherwise, that in-between phase of things can just drag on for weeks where you're just kind of puttering around, getting nothing done.
If you could trade lives with anyone living or dead for a day, who would it be?
I've been so lucky being me. Being me has worked out so much better than I ever imagined it would.
Yeah.
There's nobody I'm looking over my shoulder going, I'd rather be that guy.
That's a great answer. If you could go back and give your younger self a piece of advice, what would it be?
Relax. I was so terrified and so, just it was eating me alive that I wasn't as good as Frank Frazetta, and I wanted to be this and I wanted to be that. But, if I went back and gave myself that advice, would it undo who I am now? It would be nice to be able to go back to that kid and say, you're going to be okay. It's going to work out.
Yeah.
But I could never have convinced the 14-year-old me. Certainly, I have a hard time believing now that it worked out as well as it did. I certainly could never go back to the 14-year-old version of me and say, don't worry, kid. Eventually, they're going to make a movie out of your thing. I wish the 14-year-old me could show up every once in a while so he could see how well it turned out.
Yeah.
Because, there are moments where you just go, man, if the 14-year-old me was here, he wouldn't fucking believe this.
I have moments like that all the time. What are you most self-conscious about?
The work.
Yeah.
Just it's to me, that's what I put out in the world. So it's the thing I'm most, I guess, self-conscious. Maybe that's not right. In some way, the work is what I'm confident about, but I'm very self-conscious about putting it out there.
Sure.
Or I don't even know if that's the right thing. I edit what I do a lot. So, people will say, "Oh, why don't you do drawings at conventions?" Well, I wouldn't do that because they'd be bad.
Right.
Or a lot of them would be bad. So when I do drawings before a convention and bring them to shows, I'm only bringing the ones that worked out. For every drawing I bring to a show,
I'm going to take that idea. That's fantastic.
For every drawing I bring to a show, there are 5 that ended up in the garbage.
Right.
And people are like, but I'd take the bad ones. And I'm like, the whole point is, I'm trying not to let the bad ones out there. I'm trying to create the illusion that when I draw, it always looks this good.
It's curation. You got to curate. What is the most childish or childlike thing that you still do?
Make up stories about monsters.
Yeah.
What my entire profession or my entire career is based on basically being a little kid who loves monster movies.
That's
So
awesome.
that's why I feel like I am the poster boy for getting away with murder. I read stories about monsters. I make up stories about monsters. I
Yeah.
draw monsters. Um, but to a lot of people, that would be very childish. I mean, it's a legit question if somebody comes up and says, "Do you actually make a living doing that?" It's like,
Yeah.
yeah, actually, I
It's a
do.
great thing. Would you rather live in the country, the suburb, or the city?
I'm a city boy, and I
Yeah.
don't drive, so I
Yeah.
like being able to walk to things.
Yeah. Excellent. If you could learn a new skill instantly, what would you like it to be and why?
Um, I guess if you could just zip it straight into my brain, I should finally learn to drive.
Yeah. That's a first. I haven't heard that answer.
No, because most people already know how to, how to drive,
Sure.
and it's just too much work.
Yeah.
But if it was like the Matrix and they could
Yeah.
just strap you in a chair and put
Yep.
the ability to drive,
Drive.
in, that'd be fine.
If money wasn't a factor, how would you like to live your life?
I can't imagine not doing what I do.
Yeah.
I guess the only other thing I've ever been able to imagine doing would be, running a little bookstore. I'd just love to be around books. A bookstore, if money really wasn't a factor at all, to have a little bookstore, which is mostly just a place to hang out with books and talk to other people, the 6 other people on earth that give a shit about the same books I give a shit. It'd be like that record store in
Empire?
is it High
Oh,
Fidelity?
High Fidelity, yeah.
I'd be that guy.
Yeah.
It'd be like, well, you're okay. I'll sell you this book.
Yeah.
You go over to the other shelf.
Right.
The good ones
you
aren't
don't
for you.
deserve this.
Yeah, I could have that bookstore
Yeah.
that would never make any money.
Yeah.
That would be fine. And then I would also have it be a gallery where I just draw and paint whatever I want.
That sounds amazing. What initially sparked you and your interest in doing what you do?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, as a kid, I drew.
Yeah.
I can't go back far enough to when and where, what started that.
Yeah.
I remember early books that we had around the house that I was fascinated with, illustrated books, the Marvel Comics cartoons.
Yeah.
Even probably before the comics, I was watching the Marvel cartoons. And then, when I was 13, when I read Dracula, that was like the cincher. That was now, no dicking around. This is your shit.
Yeah.
You're going to spend the rest of your life somehow rolling around in this kind of Victorian ghost story, vampire, fog streets. That is your shit.
Yeah.
So.
That's excellent. What are some bad recommendations you've heard in your profession?
Recommendations to me?
Or in general, advice you've heard
Well,
that you're like, that's not quite right.
When I was first in comics, the conventional wisdom passed down to me from certain editors was, you got to do a monthly book. You got to grind out a monthly book, and because of course I'm looking at guys, the studio guys. I'm looking at Bernie Wrightson and Kaluta and Jeff Jones, and it's like, yeah. But you got to bang out a monthly book, so you have a reputation, and then you can go on to do the fancy shit.
Right.
Well, I can understand why a publisher would say that, because they want you on a monthly book.
Sure.
But if you don't do your best work fast, you will get a reputation
Right.
for being an artist who isn't very good.
Right.
And that's where I was. I was doing, at one point I did 2 books at the same time, 2 miniseries at the same time.
Yeah.
Like probably in 6 months I drew 8 issues.
Holy smokes.
And just in layouts. So I was at the mercy of the inker.
Right.
And you couldn't tell what I did, and I was working so fast I couldn't have done anything like my best work. And
Sure.
it's like, oh yeah, you're going to get a reputation as a guy nobody gives a shit about.
Right.
So instead, if you can't hack the monthly grind, then you look for, thank God around that time, it started to be, prestige format books and stuff with looser deadlines. So I became a special projects guy.
Yeah.
So I did eventually get a reputation, but my reputation was based on books where I took my time
Yeah.
and didn't have a 4-week deadline breathing down my neck, because I
That's
can't
excellent.
function like that.
How has failure or apparent failure set you up for later successes?
Um, that one I probably have like an oversimplified answer, because I was terrible at the beginning. Um, but even I didn't completely fail, but it was clear I was not good enough to do certain things.
Right.
And I have no fallback plan. The only
Right.
thing I could do was draw this stuff. There's nothing more frightening than moving to New York with pretty much no money to break into comics and find out you're not good enough to do it.
Mm.
And so what that failure does is say, I can't get work because I'm shitty. I will work very hard to be less shitty. That's all I
Right.
knew how to do. It wasn't
Right.
like, oh, well, then I'll go be a baseball player. It's like,
Right.
no, this is what I do. It was a shock to the system that nobody was impressed. I mean, it's one thing, you come out of a community where you're like one of the better artists, or you're in art school where everybody goes, oh, you're great, you'll have no trouble getting work. But then you go to the real world. You go to New York City and they go,
It's
yeah,
the big fish, small pond
yeah,
situation.
you're actually kind of shitty.
Yeah.
So, it scares the fuck out of you, and then you work really hard to not be that.
Yeah. What is one of the best or most worthwhile investments you've made, whether it is time or money?
I mean, obviously time.
Yeah.
Like in my career.
Yeah.
The only thing I could think of when I think of investment is I invested a lot of work into creating this Hellboy world, which is our security. It's 80 some odd books in print,
amazing.
So that is I see that as an investment. And of course we did buy a house, which I would have always been too chicken shit to buy a house. Like, oh no, what if something goes wrong? We can't pay the mortgage. But thank God I have a wife who is a real adult, and I'd still be renting a 2-bedroom apartment in Portland, Oregon. But yeah, the thing that paid off was just putting in the work, investing in that world.
Yeah.
Because when I did the first Hellboy, I of course didn't think it was going to do well.
Yeah.
And it wasn't a failure, but it didn't set the world on fire. And my first thought after I did Hellboy was, well, I'll go back and do another Batman book.
Sure.
That's how my career is going to be. In between doing commercial books, I'll do my creator-owned book. And my wife and I'm sure somebody at Dark Horse said, or you could just do another Hellboy book. So what I really did was I invested in my own character. I kind of, instead of, and I've seen a lot of guys who didn't. I saw a lot of guys who did a creator-owned book, and it didn't set the world on fire, and they immediately ran back to Marvel and DC.
Safety.
And safety, and they never built their thing that ultimately, if it works, is going to benefit you a billion times more than being an artist on Batman.
Absolutely. What are 1 to 3 books that have greatly influenced your life?
Dracula, as I mentioned, was like one of those light switch books. Pinocchio.
Yeah.
The absurdity and the weirdness and the sadness and the frenzy of Pinocchio is I think that and Dracula are always ticking in my head. There's just those inform the way I look at things.
Yeah.
Those are the two that
Excellent.
I think of.
Who are your top 5 influences in your life?
I'm sure I should work a regular human being in that list. But it's like I wish I could say, that 5th grade teacher. I did have a really good teacher in art school, a couple of them, Vince Perez, Gary Rudell, really good guys who didn't quite understand comics, but they could see that I knew what I was doing, so they kind of encouraged me, as opposed to, that's never going to work, kid, do this instead.
Right.
So those are like the two great teachers. But
Yeah.
then, you know, it's like, it's my influences, you know, it's Frazetta, who I, you know, got an ulcer because at 17 I wasn't as good as Frazetta.
Whoever can reach that height, though, you know.
Yeah. Well, it took years to realize he's much older than you, and he's a legitimate freak.
Yes.
You know, but still, at 17, you're just kind of going, yeah, but.
Yeah.
Frazetta was the pinnacle, and then, you know, Bernie Wrightson. I thought I'd go insane because I wasn't as good as Bernie Wrightson. Those were the big ones, and then, you know, there's a ton of other artists, but those are the guys, I think. Those are the big mountains to climb.
Sure.
And you never got there, but you got someplace because at least you were aiming.
Well, yeah, and
something.
you became you know, which is fantastic.
Yeah. That's and that's you know, this is like my thing to, you know, talking to young artists. You know, like, it's, you may never get to that thing, but the fact that you've got something you're reaching for, the fact that you've set some kind of artistic goal for yourself, sadly, you're probably always going to be a little frustrated because you never hit it.
Yeah.
But the fact that you're aiming for it, as opposed to some artists I know who seem extremely content being a very mediocre artist.
Sure.
I think we know some of the same people.
Yes.
And you go,
I call it McDonald's syndrome. You get to where people like it and you don't change.
yeah, and I think they're probably much less frustrated than I am because
Sure.
they're very happy with what they do. And I'm never 100% happy with what I do, but I'm constantly trying to do something, as opposed to going, oh, 15-year-old boys think I'm the, you know, I'm the greatest thing going.
Right.
That's all I want.
Yeah. My last question for you is, what would you like your legacy to be?
As I'm very, very old now, I give it a little bit of a thought, and I just go, I'd like to be seen as a good artist. I like to be seen as a guy who created something that lasted, but what's really important is I'd like to be an example of a guy who did something nobody else was going to do. Not that it's better than anybody else's thing, but like, that's why the Amazing Screw-On Head collection is so important to me. I wanted to put work out there that had no obvious commercial reason. It was just like, here's a guy who put stuff out in the world and wasn't just trying to sell a TV show. You know, he was a real artist.
Yeah.
Because at some point, and again, I've been very, very lucky, Hellboy pays the bills, and I'm very proud of the Hellboy and that whole Hellboy world, and I'll never do anything bigger than the Hellboy world. But because that's working, I feel obligated to keep pushing and putting work out there, whether it's paintings or these little odd comics that I'll do, putting stuff out there where I get as close to just taking the shit from the inside of my head and putting it in the world. Put stuff out there that only could exist because I did it without any commercial goal.
That's excellent. Well, that wraps up our interview.
Cool.
Thank you so much, Mike.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Excellent.
Hi, this is Arthur Adams. You're watching The Couch Doodle Show, and I will not say Fragaboom.